Madam Clerk, the time is 6 p.m. I call to order this special closed session of the Emeryville City Council, acting as the successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency and Management of Emeryville Services Authority. This meeting is being conducted in person at 1333 Park Avenue here in Emeryville, California. The City Council welcomes comments, including criticisms about the policies, procedures, programs, or services of the city or acts or missions of the City Council. Speakers shall not use threatening, profane, or abusive language which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of a City Council, successor agency, management of Emerald Services Authority, or related meeting. The city is committed to maintaining a workplace free of unlawful harassment and is mindful that city staff regularly attend council meetings. Discriminatory statements or conduct that would potentially violate the Fair Employment and Housing Act, such as statements or conduct that is hostile, intimidating, oppressive, or abusive, is per se disruptive to a meeting and will not be tolerated. Madam Clerk, the roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders? Here. Councilmember Carr?
Present.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Here.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Present.
And Mayor Welch.
Here. Item 3 is ex parte communications. Members, do any of you have any ex parte communications to report for this agenda? Seeing and hearing none. Item 4 is public comment. Any member of the public that would like to make a comment on closed session items only can do so now for 2 minutes. Seeing no members of the public here with us, I am now closing public comment. Madam Clerk, we will be taking items 5, all the sub-items, item 6 and sub-items 7, sub-items 8 and sub-items, and item 9 and sub-items in closed session and report out of closed session. When we return, the time is 6:01 p.m. We are adjourned to closed session. 44 PM, we have returned from closed session. Mr. City Attorney, do you mind reporting out of closed session?
Thank you, Mayor Welch. There was no reportable action taken in closed session tonight.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The time is still 6:44 PM. Uh-oh. This meeting is adjourned. Madam Clerk, the time is 6:45 PM. I call to order this special study session of the Emeryville City Council. This meeting is being conducted in person at 1333 Park Avenue here in Emeryville, California. The City Council welcomes comments, including criticism about the policies, procedures, programs, or services of the city or acts or omissions of the City Council. Speakers shall not use threatening, profane, or abusive language which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of a City Council, successor agency, management of Emeryville Service Authority, or related meeting. The city is committed to maintaining a workplace full of unlawful harassment and is mindful that city staff regularly attend council meetings. Discriminatory statements or conduct that would potentially violate the Fair Employment Housing Act, such as statements or conduct that is hostile, intimidating, oppressive, or abusive, is per se disruptive to a meeting and will not be tolerated. Madam Clerk, the roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Here.
Councilmember Carr?
Present.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Here.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Present.
And Mayor Welch.
Here. Item 3 is approval of the final agenda. Do we have a motion on the final agenda?
I'll move approval.
Second.
Madam Clerk, we have a motion and second. The roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Aye.
And Mayor Welch.
Aye. Item 4 is ex parte communications. Members, do any of you have any ex parte communications to report for this agenda? Seeing and hearing none. Moving on to item 5, which is public comment. Any member of the public that would like to comment on an item that is not on this agenda can do so now for 2 minutes. Seeing no members of the public here with us, I am now closing public comment. Item 6 is our study session on the Climate Action Plan update. And who do we have? Hello, welcome.
Good evening,
Good evening.
Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm Nancy Humphrey, Environmental Program Supervisor, and I'm here to introduce the presentation that's going to be given by our Civic Spark Fellow, Talia Paulson. And Civic Spark is an AmeriCorps program in California and a couple of other states that is aimed at 2 things. One is increasing the capacity of local government to work on sustainability, and the other is to develop the next generation of sustainability leaders. So Talia is a graduate of Wash U in St. Louis. She's an Oakland girl, and her degree from Wash U is in environmental analysis. And she's only a few more weeks here with us, but she has been so valuable to us and so flexible and such a good worker. So anyway, she's going to give you a presentation about where we stand on implementing our climate action plan. So Talia, and she'll tell you about your gifts as well.
Thank you, Nancy. Hi, Talia, welcome.
Hello.
And members, just to note, because we are having some projection issues, that the presentation has been printed out for us.
Yes. All right. Yeah, before I get started, you might notice some mugs at your desks, which are part of our efforts to reduce single-use disposable items in city facilities. So we designed and created these mugs for city staff and for you guys as well. All right. And yeah, I'll just tell you when to flip to the next page of the presentation. So as Nancy said, I'm Talia Paulson. I am the Civic Spark Fellow working with Nancy and Matt in environmental programs. And tonight I'll be providing a 2024 Climate Action Plan progress report, which will go over Emeryville's Climate Action Plan and provide an update on where we are with our progress. Environmental Programs tries to provide these updates every few years, and the most recent one was provided to Council in 2019. Next page. So to go over the agenda for the presentation, I'm going to start by giving some background and an overview on Emeryville's Climate Action Plan. Then I will discuss our Climate Action Plan implementation actions and our progress with those. Then I will dive into our greenhouse gas emissions data and provide some analysis. And finally, I'll discuss some next steps that the city can take to continue achieving our climate action plan goals. Next page. So for some background, as a broad overview, climate action plans are detailed strategic frameworks for measuring, planning, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and related climate impacts in the face of climate change. In 2008, Emeryville created its first climate action plan and was among the first set of cities to do so. This plan, among other things, included greenhouse gas emission reduction goals for 2020. And then in 2016, the city updated its climate action plan and created a climate action plan 2.0, which included greenhouse gas emission reduction goals for 2030 and 2050. And that's the plan that I will be providing progress updates on today. Next page. So what exactly is in Emeryville's climate action plan 2.0? As I mentioned, this plan includes greenhouse gas reduction targets for 2030 and 2050. Additionally, the plan has a hazard vulnerability assessment, mitigation and adaptation action plans for 2030, a vision for 2050, and a monitoring plan. The two parts of the plan that I'll mostly be focusing on are those greenhouse gas reduction targets and the mitigation and adaptation plans for 2030, but first to briefly touch on the hazard vulnerability assessment. This includes regional risks identified as being relevant to Emeryville, such as flooding, sea level rise, temperature increases, and fire hazards. And the city is also currently working on an updated local hazards mitigation plan, which will tie into future climate action planning and will include the most updated information on local hazards facing our city. Next slide. So starting with the greenhouse gas reduction targets, working with 2005 as a baseline year, the Climate Action Plan had a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions citywide 25% by 2020, 40% by 2030, and 80% by 2050. These numbers were chosen since they aligned with California state targets at the time the plan was created. Since 2016, the state has adopted more ambitious climate goals, and the state has a goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2045, which would mean a 100% reduction in emissions. This is not yet built into our climate action plan, but is a goal that we will take into account in future planning. I will also note that greenhouse gas emissions are measured and expressed throughout this presentation in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent gases. I'll get back to our greenhouse gas emission targets, discussing our progress with those in a moment, but first I'm going to touch on some of the means to reach these targets, which are laid out in the Climate Action Plan as implementation action items. Next page. As I explained, to help achieve our greenhouse gas emission targets and also to help combat some of the local hazards I mentioned earlier, the CAP 2.0 includes mitigation and adaptation implementation actions that the city will strive to complete by 2030. These implementation actions are split into 7 different categories where climate action is particularly critical to consider, and these categories are transportation, urban space, government operations, buildings, energy, waste, and adaptation. Next slide. In total, there are 140 actions laid out in the Climate Action Plan divided into those 7 categories, and the goal is to have these actions completed by 2030. This pie chart shows our current progress as of July 2024. As you can see, there is a small portion of actions that are 100% completed, but a large portion that have major elements completed or are ongoing. And there are also some actions that are no longer applicable. Even though there are a good amount of actions that we haven't started, we are still on track to completing these actions by 2030. Some examples of projects that fall into these different categories. A completed project is the South Bayfront bicycle/pedestrian bridge, which falls under that transportation section. An example of a project that has major elements completed is finishing the north-south Emeryville Greenway for biking and walking. This project is mostly complete but has a few blocks left. An example of an ongoing project is implementing traffic calming and speed limits to reduce vehicle speeds in residential neighborhoods. This is something that we are currently taking action on, but it's more of an ongoing goal. And an example of a project that we haven't yet started in the building section is developing a commercial energy performance benchmarking and audit ordinance. This is something that Berkeley has done and that we're interested in pursuing but haven't yet started. And next slide. So now looking at this progress by category, you can see that we are further along in some categories than others, but are making good progress in all of them. And it's also important to note that these implementation actions conceived in 2016 do not encompass everything that the city does to advance climate action. They just represent a portion of our work and the actions that were available to us at the time. Next page. So now that we've touched on some of these CAP implementation actions, I'm going to move on to talking about our city's greenhouse gas inventory and emissions. So since 2005, we've been tracking Emeryville's community-wide greenhouse gas emissions using a regional tool prepared by Stop Waste with technical support from PlaceWorks. And using this tool, we track emissions from 4 different sectors: transportation, energy, off-road vehicles, and waste. And for all of these categories, the greenhouse gas emissions are calculated by multiplying the actual usage data by the carbon intensity or emissions factor of the associated energy source. So to go through these sections briefly, the first is transportation. This sector includes fuel use from all on-road vehicles. This data is measured in vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and it only includes rides within the city of Emeryville, so it doesn't include traffic just passing through the city on the highway. Then, in addition to VMT, the vehicle carbon fuel intensity is also taken into account in these calculations. Then the next sector is energy. This sector is split into 2 categories: electricity and natural gas. Again, the actual usage for electricity and natural gas are calculated along with the emissions factor or carbon intensity of the electricity or natural gas. While the carbon intensity of natural gas will always remain the same, the carbon intensity of electricity can differ a lot depending on the electricity source, which I'll get more into later on. The next category is off-road vehicles. This includes fuel use from mobile equipment and vehicles not used for on-road transportation, such as landscaping equipment and industrial equipment like generators. And then the last category is waste, which includes the waste materials deposited in a landfill, so all waste that isn't recycled or composted, and this waste has an emissions factor associated with it as well, based on the landfill gases emitted. Next page. Now that we've covered the different sectors, we can take a look at this graph here that shows Emeryville's total greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 to 2022, and 2022 is the most recent year that we have complete data for. There's a lot to discuss on this graph, but first, as a quick reminder, these are Emeryville's greenhouse gas emissions overall, not on a per capita basis, which we will look at later on. So overall, from 2005 to 2022, there's been a 30% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. Going back to those greenhouse gas reduction goals, we had a 25% reduction goal by 2020, which we reached and surpassed with a 37% reduction. Another thing I'll point out is that the sectors that produce the largest percentage of emissions are clearly the transportation sector and the energy sector, made up of natural gas and electricity. And the next thing you'll probably notice from this graph is that emissions are steadily decreasing from 2005 to 2019. And then in 2020, there are some changes and emissions start going back up again. There's a few different explanations for this, and one of them has to do with COVID. So next page. Again, 2020 has some notable changes from 2019, specifically in the transportation and electricity sector. So those purple and green bars on the graph. You can see from this graph that emissions from the transportation sector had a significant decrease in 2020, and emissions from the electricity sector had a significant increase. The decrease in emissions from the transportation sector can likely be attributed to people staying at home more and not driving as much during the pandemic, which is a consistent trend regionally. And you can see that in 2021, those transportation sector emissions start going up again. From 2019 to 2020, there was a 30% decrease in emissions from the transportation sector. And then from 2020 to 2021, there was a 35% increase. So they essentially went back to 2019 levels. While the changes from the transportation sector can likely be attributed to COVID and people driving less, the changes in the electricity sector actually have a different, unrelated explanation that has to do with the carbon intensity of our electricity. So next page. To help explain that, this graph here just looks at the energy sector, and it shows Emeryville's total energy emissions broken up by residential and non-residential electricity and natural gas emissions. This, as you can see here, the natural gas emissions, so those blue bars, have remained pretty consistent from 2005 to 2022, but there are many more fluctuations in electricity. And this graph also notes a few key moments that contribute to this fluctuation. So from 2015 to 2017, there's a significant drop in greenhouse gas emissions from electricity, which is likely due to PG&E, our primary electricity provider at the time, making their energy mix cleaner by including more clean energy and bringing down the carbon intensity of their electricity. And then of note is that in 2018, Emeryville joined Ava Community Energy, formerly known as East Bay Community Energy, which is a community choice aggregation program that provides cleaner electricity to its customers. And this major increase in electricity emissions from 2019 to 2020 has to do with Ava's fuel mix. So prior to 2020, Ava was using nuclear as part of its energy mix, which is a carbon-free energy source. But then in 2020, Ava's board voted to remove nuclear energy from its mix, which meant a large chunk of clean energy was no longer part of their available power, and the emissions factor got higher. But that being said, we should start to see those emissions going back down again after 2022, which you can start to see at the end of this graph. Since in 2022, City Council opted to join Ava's Renewable 100 service citywide, which is their cleanest electricity option that uses only carbon-free electricity from solar, wind, and hydro, and has an emissions factor of 0. Only 2 to 3% of customers opted out of that service in Emeryville, so we should start to see the emissions from electricity going back down in 2023, since Renewable 100 was adopted in October of 2022. You can see from this graph that the emissions from electricity can decrease with cleaner energy, but the emissions from natural gas cannot, which is why in order to decrease energy emissions overall, we need to focus on electrification and reducing the usage of natural gas. Next page. So just to demonstrate how critical the emissions factor is in determining electricity emissions, here's a graph of Emeryville's electricity usage in kilowatt hours from 2005 to 2022. If you remember from the previous graph, there was a huge jump in emissions from 2019 to 2020. But looking at this graph, you can see that the actual electricity usage actually went down during that time, which is how we know that it's really the carbon intensity of electricity that's driving that change in emissions rather than the actual usage itself. Again, this is because with carbon-free electricity, there aren't carbon emissions associated with it. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, those previous graphs showed Emeryville's total emissions, which is what our Climate Action Plan emission reduction targets are based on. But Emeryville's population has also changed significantly since 2005. It's increased around 60%. So it's important to look at the per capita emissions as well. And there's two different ways of measuring these per capita emissions. One is just with the residential population, and one is with the service population, which includes both residents and number of jobs in Emeryville. So first, just looking at the residential population, per capita, there's been a 57% decrease in emissions from 2005 to 2022. And again, the population itself has grown almost the same amount during that time. Next page. So this next graph shows the per capita emissions for the service population, which again is the number of residents and jobs in Emeryville. And here the per capita emissions have decreased 44% between 2005 and 2022, and the service population increased around 22% during this time. So now that we've looked at these graphs, I'm going to provide some key takeaways and data points from those two largest emitting sectors, energy and transportation. Next page. For both categories, I'll touch on both the carbon intensity of the energy source, the emissions factor, and also the actual usage, since again, both of those are critical when talking about emissions. So starting with energy, overall from 2005 to 2022, there's been almost a 30% decrease in electricity carbon intensity, which again is from our electricity sources getting cleaner. In addition to the carbon intensity going down, both residential and non-residential electricity usage also went down on a per capita basis, around 20% and 30% respectively. And for these per capita calculations, the residential population was used for the residential usage and the service population was used for the non-residential usage. This reduction in electricity usage can possibly be explained by increased energy efficiency. And then interestingly, natural gas usage also went down citywide and it decreased significantly per capita on a residential level. And we aren't entirely sure what's driving this decrease, but it can partially be attributed to weather changes. We've been seeing warmer winters, so people might be using less gas for heating. And another explanation is increased electrification, especially in new buildings as electric appliances are becoming more desirable and people are transitioning away from natural gas. Next page. So these are some of the actions that council has taken that has influenced these changes. So one, as I mentioned before, is that the city chooses our carbon intensity for electricity, and joining AVA's Renewable 100 service will continue decreasing this carbon intensity and driving those emissions down. As for energy efficiency efforts, Emeryville partners with regional groups like Stop Waste and Bayren to promote energy efficiency rebates and incentives to residents. Additionally, state and local legislation are encouraging electrification through gas bans and REACH codes, which proactively encourage builders and developers to electrify. Even though Emeryville's REACH code is no longer being enforced, these types of codes do signal a change and encourage electrification. Next slide. So moving on to transportation, the interesting metrics to look at are vehicle carbon intensity and vehicle miles traveled. While vehicle carbon intensity decreased 25% from 2005 to 2022, and vehicle miles traveled increased by 5% overall, but on a per capita basis, they actually decreased 14% using that service population. The decrease in vehicle carbon intensity can likely be attributed to more energy efficient hybrid and electric vehicles on the road, and the reduction in per capita vehicle miles traveled may be due to people driving less, taking more public transit, or using active modes of transportation. Next page. So this brings me to council actions that were taken to help promote these reductions in vehicle carbon intensity and vehicle miles traveled. To help encourage a decrease in vehicle carbon intensity, council has promoted the adoption of electric vehicles and is converting our municipal vehicle fleet to all electric. Additionally, council has funded public transit and promotes active transportation through bike share, bike infrastructure, and pedestrian improvements. And we have also implemented paid parking, all efforts to help decrease the overall vehicle miles traveled. Next slide. So going back to vehicle carbon intensity for a moment, this graph shows EV adoption rates in Emeryville zip code from 2010 to 2022, and it includes all registered EVs in the 94608 zip code. So the zip code does include parts of Oakland in addition to Emeryville, but it still paints a picture of the significant increase in EV adoption in the area. Next page. So to conclude, how do we continue reaching these goals? As a recap, these are our total emissions and emission reduction goals laid out by our climate action plan. I've already gone over a lot of the actions we've taken as a city and city council has taken to reach these goals. We reached and surpassed our 2020 goal, and we're on the right track to achieving our 2030 goal. But in order to see a significant reduction in emissions and meet increasingly aggressive state targets, we must continue threading sustainability into everything that we do as a city. Next page. So additionally, to continue reaching these goals, it's important to focus on local actions where we have control and can make large impacts. So we've seen there are some areas that we have more control over as a city than others. so we can continue working on areas where we do have agency and can influence real change. Additionally, we want to continue working towards completing our CAP implementation actions and making sure they're being prioritized. And moving forward, we will continue tracking our climate action progress, and we want to consider enhancing our tracking with data, again, specifically related to local metrics that we have more control over. So some of these additional metrics that we want to start tracking include public transit ridership, waste diversion rates, trees planted, bike racks installed. And with these additional metrics, we can get an even better sense of Emeryville's climate action work. Thank you so much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Talia. Members, did you have any clarifying questions for our call for public comment? Member Carr.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a clarifying question, but I do want to thank and acknowledge Talia. I have heard this yesterday at the Sustainability Committee, and it was very well presented. Thank you, Talia.
Thank you.
And good luck for your next adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Carr. Anyone else clarifying questions? All right. Now's the time for public comment. Any member of the public that would like to make a comment on the study session item can do so now for 2 minutes. Going once, going twice. All right. I am closing public comment. Members, I turn it back to you. Member Bowders.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much for your presentation. As an AmeriCorps alumni, I salute you for your service to the community. I hope you're getting an excellent experience here with our staff and environmental. And this report was really informative in a number of ways. I think one of the takeaways I have is it looks at the surface as if in like 2020, we either bounce back from the progress we're making or we're stagnating. But I think one of the things that you have on both ends of the graphs, but isn't clear in the in-between years, is the service population and the residential population changing so dramatically, right? So we're capturing, except for a couple of these charts, like the raw numbers of water emissions, even though we're adding population, and there were a lot of people who stayed home during COVID. So some of these numbers, I think, to the public could look like, oh, we flattened out, but I think it's a really important thing that you have in here that you mentioned near the end of the presentation about how on a per capita basis we've made improvements, because I think that really shows the progress. And I'm really looking forward to hearing, I note at the end that you've identified some ways to further measure how we can make progress towards our goals, but I'm really interested in also what additional or new interventions might be helpful for that. So thank you for the presentation.
Vice Mayor Moore.
Thank you, Talia. I want to echo the remarks from Member Carr and Member Bowders. We really appreciate the work you've done on this high priority for us, sustainability in the city and reducing our climate footprint. And to that effect, the pie chart that shows the numerous actions that we've accomplished, the ones still to go. I think as I mentioned during our meeting yesterday, it would be helpful to do a deep dive into those, one by one, sort out the high impact ones from the ones that maybe don't contribute to our goals, and then we can have a better sense of what we are doing in concrete terms to really tackle these problems.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else? Talia, thank you so much. I just want to echo the sentiments my colleagues shared. And this is, I feel like, one of the most impressive things about Emeryville is that a city our size takes this plan so seriously, and we have done the research and are doing the work and have consistently had council members that support this work. And we're showing that even a city our size, which one could argue has less staff to work on, or that we shouldn't even worry about it because we're so small. I feel like this is one of the most amazing things about Emeryville, is just how seriously we take our impact to addressing the climate crisis. So thank you again for your presentation. Did anyone have anything else? Do we need to give direction or anything? We're not giving direction. All right, thank you. And then, oh, look at us being right on time. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:14, and this special study session is adjourned. Get to use my new mug. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:15 PM. I call to order this City of Emeryville as the successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency. This meeting is being conducted in person at 1333 Park Avenue here in Emeryville, California. Madam Clerk, I would like to note that all members are still present, and my previous comments regarding appropriate meeting behavior still stand. And I'll move along to item 3, is approval of the final agenda. Members, do we have a motion on the final agenda?
I move approval of the final agenda.
Second.
Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second. The roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Aye.
And Mayor Welch.
Aye. Item 4 is ex parte communications. Members, do any of you have ex parte communications to report for this agenda? Seeing and hearing none. Item 5 is public comment for the consent agenda and items not on the agenda. Any member of the public that wishes to make a comment on the consent agenda or items not on the agenda can do so now for 2 minutes. Come on up.
Pleasure to see you all again.
Good evening. Are we all set, Madam Clerk? Thank you.
I'm Fran Quittel. I serve on the Budget Advisory Committee, and I live in the city of Emeryville for a long time. I know most of you, and I came here a couple of months ago, and I spoke about SB 1060, and the lobbyist from Townsend was here. And at the time, that bill protected wildfire victims, and now that bill has been amended. So I wanted to tell you I wanted to give you some updates, in my opinion, of things that you should know. Now that insurance companies are, the proposal is to have them use models, the new bill does not say that the state establishes the models, that all the insurance companies will use one model, or that the models will be public. I've gone to various webinars and seminars with Commissioner Ricardo Lara. There's no mention of PG&E at all, not its rate hikes, its executive pay bonuses, or any monitoring that the California Department of Insurance does for PG&E statistics on its progress to underground wiring or manage vegetation. Commissioner Lara has talked about addressing raising fair plan limits to cover condominium HOA insurance so that these limits will cover large condos, and the limit that he has said is $20 million. That limit is woefully short. Emeryville and other cities in our state have large, older and new condos whose replacement values far exceed $20 million. In fact, at Watergate, the replacement value would be over $400 million. Also, the new premiums are costly, taking millions of dollars out of homeowners associations' operating budgets. Many of those dollars are needed to repair those condominiums. Many of these older and newer HOAs no longer qualify for conventional.
Thank you for your comment, Fran.
May I finish?
If you can ask, maybe you want someone to yield their time for you, I will allow it to let you finish.
Is there anyone else? Okay.
And just 1 second. Can you reset it for 2 minutes?
Thank you. Many of these HOAs no longer qualify for conventional mortgage lending from Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. That means the units are unsaleable. Even if condominiums have insurance, there's no guarantee that they will qualify for Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac conventional mortgage lending. And that's really an issue that could damage the entire state. Fannie Mae maintains a list of unavailable properties that have issues involving environmental hazards, title issues, structural problems, or other issues that would affect the safety, soundness, or marketability of the property. In other words, obtaining insurance, spending millions of dollars to obtain the new insurance does not guarantee conventional mortgage availability. I want to particularly thank David Mora for working with me on this issue. I appreciate his interest, and I appreciate the interest of every member of City Council in speaking to Bill SB 1060. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last call for public comment on, yes, for the redevelopment agency. Right, public comment is now closed. Item 6 is the consent calendar. Members, would any of you like to pull an item off the consent calendar? If not, do we have a motion for consent?
Motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second. The roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Aye.
And Mayor Welch.
Aye. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:20. This meeting is adjourned. Madam Clerk, the time is still 7:20. I call to order this meeting of the Emeryville City Council. This meeting is being conducted here in person at 1330 Park Avenue here in Emeryville. Madam Clerk, to note, all members are still present, and my previous comments regarding appropriate meeting behavior still stand. Moving along to item 3 is approval of the final agenda. Members, do we have a motion for the final agenda?
I'll move approval for the final agenda.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, the roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Aye.
And Mayor Welch.
Aye. I'm going to hold for item 4 because I know we have some folks arriving for special orders of the day, so we can move along to item 5, announcements of commission committee vacancies.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, just wanted to let you know that we have a current recruitment open for unfilled vacancies. The recruitment closes on August 16th. It includes 3 vacancies on the BPAC, 1 on the Commission on Aging, 4 on EDAC, and 2 on the Planning Commission. Additionally, we have 1 vacancy on the Emeryville Transportation Management Authority. The application is available on the website, and again, it closes on August 16th. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, council member special announcements and reports on meetings in attendance or meetings attended. No. Item 7, city manager's report.
Nothing to report, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Item 8, ex parte communications. Members, please take one more glance at the agenda. Do we have any ex parte communications to report? Seeing, hearing none. Item 9, public comment for the consent agenda and items not on the agenda. Any member of the public that is wishing to make a comment on the consent agenda or items not on the agenda can do so now for 2 minutes. Please. Hello, how are you? Just speak into the mic.
My name is Mike Ferrugia. I'm a resident at 6221 Hollis Street, 62nd Street, General Cable Building. I talked to Charles Harris a couple hours ago. He said I should come in and talk to you guys about what's going on in the building. There's a lot of construction going on. For the past couple of years, there's been a lot of water and electricity shut off. Elevator was down for a couple months. At one point, there was retrofitting going on, really loud jackhammering. We have a air meter inside our apartment, and it was reading 1,000 particles per cubic meter, where the American Lung Association has it at 10 is a safe amount. So way off the charts. Our whole building is covered in smoke. But most recently, they've been demoing the roof, and all this debris is coming down inside of our units. And my wife had some of that debris tested for lead. It came out positive. So, you know, we're kind of battling this big corporation on, we're fighting for our rights, for our health and of our cats and ourselves. And we've got this particular matter coming down. Some of these pieces are coming down off the ceiling, like these chunks of material, like the size of a loaf of bread. And our landlord's response is basically, if you don't like it, you know, move out. So that's it. Just we just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other speakers?
So I'm just going to try to make this as quick as possible. I am Mike Feruggia's wife, and we are experiencing the debris, the shutoffs, et cetera. But this is an investigation, or like an inquiry to this, has lasted a lot longer. On March 31st, 2021, Wareham called a Zoom meeting with all the tenants in the building explaining the overland or Project V, and gave us an outline of what would happen. As each lease came up after this meeting, in good standing, we were not offered new leases. We were told that we were moved to month month I was very concerned about this, and as people moved out, not wanting to be subject to being told to leave, they moved out. There are only, I believe, 14 residents left. 79% of the building is empty. So my concern then was, why are you holding these apartments empty and not putting them on the market pool? And when I looked at that, when I started looking into that, why anybody would do that, I found an article that was written on November 16th, 2021. And in it, it states that Wareham, hoping to capitalize on local density bonus points framework to secure height, Wareham has proposed to convert 10 of the 41 live-work units into affordable housing. At the end of that article, it says that Wareham has previously said that the units were already rented out at below market rate, according to city documents. I couldn't find any information on which low-income housing was already in place, and I knew everybody that was living in the building, and we were not at low-income rate. Can I?
Thank you.
Can I?
If you wanted,
Use your 2 minutes, James? Yeah. Okay.
oh, Jane, just say I yield.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I couldn't find any information on that. Shortly after that, Wareham changed the ownership, corporate ownership, to somebody else. So I looked up on ChatGPT why you would change your corporate ownership to a different. And it just kept pointing back to streamlining permitting and also bonus density points. Actually justifying, or whatever criteria you use for bonus density points, justifying that or validating that somehow. The last part of it is, yeah, what if somebody could look into what criteria is Wareham using to get those bonus density points, and are we being considered, the last people in the building, as those low income? And I second as far as all of the debris and stuff, but I just took a different approach on at each stage. Why was each stage happening? But it was in an effort to secure my housing stability, because I knew if I called and said the water was turned off, the reply is, we told you the water was going to be turned off. We warned you the water was going to be turned off. And to add, the water was turned off for about 3 weeks, and we were relocated into the unit next door. to use, because half of the building was cut out, so we lived on this side, but we were put into empty units to use the bathroom and wash our dishes. And then we were told that we had to leave the building because there would be no electricity or water, and that there would be construction going on, and we
Thank
were
you for
told to
your
go to a
comment.
hotel.
Thank you for your comment.
Yes.
I'll allow for one more.
Yes. So we were told to go to a hotel, and I said, is it harmful to stay in the building? Because my cats are there 24/7. And he said, yes, no, it's not harmful, but you can't stay. And that just didn't make sense to me. So, and I couldn't take my cats with me because of the demeanor of my cats. People did take their pets, but my cats are, we do cat rescue, so they're feral pretty much, and I couldn't take them. So I ended up staying with them there, and it was no electricity, no water, and a lot of debris, etc. So I just need some investigation and some help and support, because, and I did ask point blank, are we being counted as the low-income housing in place that you stated for the bonus density points? And the response I got back was, I don't understand your question.
Thank you for your comment. Any other for public comment?
Okay, I'd like to wait until the full council is back.
Please continue with public comment. All 5 council members are present. But he's present.
Okay, well, okay, I watched the last meeting, and there was a woman that came and spoke about she had a little library on 62nd Street, and she's complained that the city of Emeryville was asking for it to be removed. She spoke for, she's a very sympathetic character. She spoke for 2 minutes and 33 seconds. So that is the amount of time that we, the people, get to speak from now on. 2 minutes and 33 seconds, because, Ms. Mayor, what you need to do is treat everybody equal and fairly. And we have to have equal access to our government. You can't make some people that you like have greater access to the government. So it's 2 minutes and 33 seconds after this, from now on, or from then on. So I heard what these people said, and I would like to say to them, you're not going to get any help, because what you're talking about is the man, Rich Robbins, he's the CEO of Wareham Development Corporation, super wealthy man, and a favorite developer of the council majority. And he has been for decades. All manner of favors get promulgated to this specific developer. All manner of public largesse gets forwarded to this specific developer. He's a favored developer. What you're talking about, you're complaining about Wareham. This city is not interested in hearing complaints, even though they may feign as if they do. You're not going to get anywhere. But I'm sympathetic to you. I feel bad that what happened to you. But I'm saying that the city is not going to help you, because that would be detrimental to their relationship with the Wareham Development Corporation. And please go to the Emeryville Tattler. Google it. Emeryville Tattler, Tattler.
Thank you for your
In the
comment.
search bar, type in Wareham.
Thank you for your comment.
I get to speak for 2
Thank
minutes
you
and
for your
33
comment.
seconds.
Thank you for your comment.
What about 2:33?
Thank you for your comment. Step back from the podium, please.
Is the chief here?
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, oh, there's.
You're disrupting the
I'm gonna go
meeting.
talk to them, thank you.
Mr. Donahue, thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to make a comment on the consent agenda or items not on the agenda? Going once, going twice. Public comment is now closed. Now, item 10 is the consent agenda. Members, would any of you like to pull an item off the consent agenda? If not, do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Is there-
Second?
Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second. The roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Aye.
And Mayor Welch.
Aye. Item 11, introduction and first reading of the ordinance of the City Council, City of Emeryville, amending Article 14 of Chapter 5 of Title 9. Did you, Mr. City Manager, did you still want to move forward with the presentation?
No, Madam Mayor, what we would like to do is continue this item to September 17th after you open the public hearing and have comments on it.
Thank you very much. Because it is still agendized, I will still hold the public hearing as scheduled. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:34. I am now opening this public hearing. Any members of the public that would like to comment on, for this public hearing item can do so now for 3 minutes. Seeing and hearing no members of the public wishing to comment on this item. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:34 p.m. I am closing the, I am making, you're making a
I'd
motion?
like to be recognized, Madam Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to motion to continue the public hearing until September 17th, 2024 at the regular city council meeting scheduled time.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Madam Clerk, the roll, please.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Pryforce?
Nay.
Vice Mayor Mora?
Aye.
And Mayor Welch.
Aye. We have no action items, so we're going to return back to item 4, which is our special order of the day. And this is a proclamation of the City Council of the City of Emeryville honoring Rena Rickles for her service to the city as our first female council member. We heard. Whereas Rena Rickles is celebrating her 80th birthday this year, today, actually. And whereas the town of Emeryville was founded in 1896 by an elected group of trustees who were all white men, and it wasn't until 1975 that a woman was elected to the city council. And whereas the period of the 1960s and 1970s was a time of change and conflict in Emeryville, and the beginning of the understanding of what changing the coastline of the bay bore an environmental cost. And whereas during that time, the density of population shifted to the development of the Watergate housing development. And whereas the Emeryville Historical Society writes about the time, construction of the Watergate apartments brought major changes in local government. By the mid-1970s, more than half the city's registered voters lived in Watergate, and 4 out of 5 city council members resided there, including the city's first female council member, Rena Rickles. And whereas among the reforms enacted by the new council majority was the creation of the redevelopment agency in 1975, with the council serving as the agency board, the adoption of the city's first redevelopment plan in 1976, and the appointment of Emeryville's first city manager, Edward Wollenberg, in 1976. And whereas many of the important changes were a result of the political voices that began advocating for smart growth, the difficult conversations they had about what smart growth abutting a body of water while still building adequate housing to serve the population looks like. And whereas these conversations continue today in earnest on a council that is far more representative of the population than it had been at the city's founding, and whereas Emeryville has been and continues to be the leader in the Bay Area in construction of adequate middle-income housing for decades, while still addressing concerns of balancing changing environmental needs, and whereas having an activist like Rena Rickles serving on the city council helped move that conversation along, and whereas Rena met another council member from Livermore, Glenn Delbacca, who was also advocating for smart growth at the League of California Cities dinner in 1978, and whereas that council member reached out to Rena's council aide and best friend, Joe Close, to ask Rena to continue their conversation over a date, and whereas that led to a marriage and move to Oakland and 2 children, and whereas in the years since Rena's term on the city council, she has continued to be one of the most influential voices in East Bay land use conversations, and in recent decades in conversations about serving our unhoused population. And now, therefore, it be resolved by the City Council of the City of Emeryville that Rena Rickles is honored as the first female Emeryville City Council member and for her continued service to the city and the surrounding communities, proclaimed by the Mayor of the City Council of the City of Emeryville at a regular meeting held Tuesday, July 16th, 2024.
Wow. Thank you. Wow. Somebody did a lot of research. Somebody told me she had an item on tonight's agenda and that we had to have dinner in Emeryville. I think I've been tricked. But if that's the kind of trick I get, thank you. And it was such a pleasure to meet you for the first time 2 years, also on my birthday.
Yes.
When you were about to become the first African-American woman mayor of Emeryville.
Here you are.
So this is beautiful.
Thank you so
I
much
have a
for all your service.
30-second story for my first meeting. And this will take you back to 1975. And that was going to be the last Monday City of Emeryville council meeting. Why? Monday night football. And I thought, all women get a honeymoon when we're first elected. Okay, I will vote for Tuesday meetings and Monday night football. However, the name of councilman will now be council member. And you vote for that, I vote for yours.
That's awesome.
And that was the beginning. And this was beautiful. Courtney, Mayor, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members. Thank you, Paul, and good luck in your next move to Berkeley. And everybody here, it's just a pleasure, and I'm just so proud of the next generation. Of course, she had to be an activist, and I think he's on his way. And I'll let you get on with your meeting. This was very special and a huge surprise.
Happy birthday. Ruth.
Happy
Part of the
birthday.
surprisement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Members, did any of you have any comments? Member Bowders?
I'll just extend my congratulations to you, Rena, for many years of leadership in the Bay Area, and for raising such fine people as your children, who some of us work with professionally. So congratulations for all the accomplishments you've had, and for being the first woman in the room. I'm sure Monday Night Football was probably the least controversial thing you had to encounter in that capacity. But
True.
that story brought a smile to my face, and I appreciate your gracefulness in that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And you've also been an idol of mine in it. Definitely a pioneer. I mean, this is a city, because of its size, can do so many things so quickly. And, sometimes it's a curse, but it's also an incredible blessing. And that's still Emeryville's, wonderful thing about shining glory is that you can do things important and quickly and change policies on a dime. And so I'm honored to be honored by you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rena. I just wanted to say before you walk off, you're the barrier breaker. And the thing about being the person that breaks the glass ceiling is you're the one that gets all the glass on them.
Oh, yeah.
And so I can only imagine what you had to endure during that time, and just being the first woman in the room, and everyone in the room having to adjust to that. But I thank you for your courage, and thank you for breaking that ceiling. When I came onto the council initially, it was then turned to a female majority council.
Oh, wow.
And so that is a part of your legacy, and I am here as a part of your legacy, so thank you for being that first. I appreciate you.
Thank you, and the appreciation is so overwhelming. I'm not usually this quiet, as you have overwhelmed me. She has surprised me, and it was a lovely gift.
Happy birthday. To the next 80.
And she's the one to throw the ladder down behind her after she breaks that glass. So, that's important too.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, I campaigned for the first African-American woman on the city council.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Ms.
I'm
Hannon.
remembering her last name, but she was Claude's niece.
Yes.
Claude Allen's niece.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Rena. Department head reports. Can I speak on this subject? No?
There are none. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
What was that?
No department head reports.
Thank you. Future agenda item request. Anybody? Member Pryforce?
I'd like to place on a future agenda. There's been a Department of Justice investigation about algorithmic software that is being used by landowners, property managers, corporate landlords who are using them to rent gouge. And so if this software, a neighbor of mine recently came across it, and Emeryville is still on this software. And I believe that Supervisor Peskin has introduced legislation in San Francisco about banning the city of San Francisco from having placings and listings on that software. And so I'd like us to consider similar legislation around Emeryville being removed from this particular software. It doesn't prevent us from being on websites that also doesn't use this kind of AI, but I believe that AI that has led to rent and gouging, and also those parties that have been involved, that shouldn't continue in Emeryville.
This is being used by private property owners, correct?
Yes. Yes, that's current. Those property owners are currently being investigated by the Department of Justice. One owner was actually raided by, I believe, the FBI. So it's criminal activity.
The city itself is not utilizing.
No, the city itself is not utilizing, but what I believe that the legislation that was introduced by the supervisors in San Francisco is about banning the city from from placements being placed on the websites, used by this software, which cities can do. I mean, that's a point of discussion, and I don't want to go into it without violating the Brown Act.
Would you be agreeable to meeting with the city attorney to get more details on that? I'm not sure if that's something that the city would be able to implement.
That's no problem. Thank you.
All right. Any other future agenda item requests? Member Pryforce.
I'd like to introduce the idea of the Pledge of Allegiance returning to these city council chambers, especially at a time when we are seeing our democracy eroded, and especially by big corporations that more so than ever, what unites us is the very reason why we should keep fighting. And so I'd like to demonstrate. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And once again, I removed under God because that was a point of tension as to why it was removed in the first place. And so I submit that to this body for consideration for a future agenda.
There is not. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:48 p.m. This meeting is adjourned.